Hello, everybody. My name is Joshua, the founder and the director of El Terreno Cultural Exchange Center here in the Ecuadorian Andes. Today, we're joined by two interns who have been here over the course of a couple of months, working together on a really interesting, sustainable off-grid cabin design, working alongside local mentors and members of the community where the cabin will be built. So this is their final presentation to give you a little bit of an insight of what our interns have been up to. So feel free to join in and ask any questions at the end. Until then, I'm going to pass you straight over to Richard and Mei Ling. Take it away.
Perfect. Hey guys. Okay, so should we just start straight away? Okay, so I arrived 3 weeks before Mei Ling to start the project with Lenin, and the first thing we did is we took a trip to the site where he was planning on having a cabin. The cabin was the aim of the project was to design an accommodation in honor of his dad, because his dad had owned that land his entire life before he passed away a few years ago. So yes, we also did some spiritual cleansing, as you can see on the right, where they had the Andean cross, just as a more cultural way of blessing the land and paying respect to what you're going to build. So then building on from that, I did a very basic site analysis where I looked at wind direction, sun path, and the landscape, and it was mainly to understand the orientation of the building. So Lenin had made a point that he wanted to frame the picturesque east landscape, which had, you can't see it through the clouds, but has a nice view of Chimborazo in the summer, and obviously nice mountain landscape. And the others would just, the other points of the cardinal points would be filled with vegetation and plants and other things. So in the same visit, I also made a point to analyze and note down all the native plants on the site, so that, because obviously it's such a high altitude in Salinas, it's quite selective which plants will survive and which plants will flourish in the lower oxygen. So I got 8 plants that we recorded, and we would later on, when we make a master plan and look at the agriculture of the site, we would hopefully plant these around the building to create a more picturesque and ideal project site. Also, we looked at the materiality of what the building would be made of, and Lenin also made a point of how he would like to locally source as much of the, and also in terms of the internship as being sustainable, we would hopefully try and source as much of the materials locally as possible. So eucalyptus, Lenin had with him, there was stones and straw on site, gravel, water, there's a river running by, soil obviously, and there were some polylepis trees grown on the patch of land. But obviously, with any project, we do have to externally source some of the materials. So there we have listed them below. Obviously, designing an adobe building, we have to analyze the soil and determine the structural qualities of it. So in that first visit to Salinas, we also did some tests, as you can see on the top left, where we did some drop tests and some cylinder tests, basically just to determine the structure and how well the soil holds up by itself. So from this, we found from the breaking point that it had quite a high amount of sand, and it wasn't binding as well as it should. So that would indicate we need to get some clay and some lime. We also did some dry tests and came to the same conclusions. Also on the right of the screen, we've got, I filtered the soil to determine the actual breakdown of what was inside. And we saw that there was a lot of sand, not enough clay, and a thin layer of lime. So again, it indicates that we will probably need to buy some lime and some clay to make a more structural adobe. But those tests would have to be carried out to determine the exact quantities. Continuing on, we have Lenin had materials that he would like to have used on the project to make it as financially responsible or efficient. So we listed down I listed down on an Excel spreadsheet all the types of wood and all the types of metal and door frames and stones that Lenin owned that we could use in the project, so that later on we could try and find out where and how much we can use. Still in the contextual research part, we looked at some precedents. These 6 precedents on the left are all local, from Chimborazo to Salinas to here in the house we're presenting in Joshua's house, and they just gave me a good idea initially, how Adobe works and how Adobe is used and how buildings are constructed in this climate. So it helped me to have a good amount of initial knowledge to design this cabin. And we had one international precedent, which was Maggie's Cardiff, and Maggie's Cardiff does a good job of, its aim of the pitched roofs was to mimic the local landscape of a bunch of houses and the mountains behind. So Lenin, once we presented that to him, he liked the idea. He wanted a pitched roof because he also wanted the cabin to mimic the surrounding landscape, which we made note of. One of the biggest challenges in Salinas was the high altitude. It's quite cold a lot of the year until summer, but at that point it is still quite colder than other parts in Ecuador. So we need to think of a way that would heat the building efficiently and sustainably. So with the help of another intern, Felix, who has left, who did environmental energy, we thought the Trombe wall would be the best idea. And how it works is it heats up the dark wall in the early hours of the morning, where there's a lot of sun. The glass would radiate the heat. The wall would hopefully gather a lot of heat in the morning. And then as the sun goes away in the later hours of the day, the wall would hopefully release some of that heat into the building.
For first designs, we were thinking about the Trombe wall, and we considered making a type of greenhouse room outside the Trombe wall that would essentially absorb all the heat during the day and make it really nice to sit in, and Lenin can put his a lot of plants in. So these drawings on the right are just a few ideas of it and what we could put. So we started our first initial ideas. We presented 4 to Lenin, and they all had a different feature. So on the left, we have one with another floor and no greenhouse room beyond the Trombe wall, and a balcony instead on top. We also played around with having one with separated spaces and one with an open plan living with a living room, kitchen, and dining room all in one. And then the bedrooms being put off to the side and not. We also included one with a porch and one not. In the end, this was Lenin's favorite one. He really liked the porch. He really liked the green room beyond the Trombe wall. He just wanted it a little bigger. He liked the open plan living and the fact that the bedrooms and the bathroom were separate. He also liked having a separate entranceway that could block the wind, because like Richard said, it's really cold in Salinas, really windy. He didn't want the wind going straight into the house, and he liked the circulation of this one.
Okay, so building on from that design, we took it and we presented 4 more designs so we could get a more comprehensive idea of what Lenin exactly wanted for his cabin. So the main issue with this previous design was the 2 bedrooms were on top of each other against the Trombe wall, which meant the bedroom 2 would get a lot more heat than the first bedroom. So we tried in more of the designs to keep the bedrooms parallel to the Trombe wall, so they would both get an equal amount of heat. So the first one, we moved the bathroom to break up the interior spaces. The second one was a more furnished design of the one we'd already shown, which he saw again. The third design incorporated more of a hallway into the open plan, and the fourth one we thought we would keep the same idea but move one of the bedrooms and have its own individual trombe wall. But yeah, we also, because Lennon mentioned earlier on that he liked the idea of having a compost toilet, we had in design the idea 3, the toilet outside with the porch, which would make it a lot easier to have it as a compost toilet, which was good to include. But ultimately, this was the last one of the 5 designs which he chose, which he liked the most. It had the initial corridor where people can take off their shoes and their coats. It included the porch, the trombe room, open plan, and the bedrooms parallel to the trombe wall, which was quite successful. So yes, although the only issue that Lennon had with this design was he didn't like the fact that to go to the bathroom you would have to walk outside, get cold, especially at night, just to use the bathroom. So from this, we decided to add a sliding door and make the porch more of an internal space, but still an area to acclimatize before entering into the cabin.
So in terms of construction for this building, in Salinas on site, there's no electricity. So we were thinking about modular construction, which is essentially pre-making these modeled modules and stuffing them with straw, and then so that you can just slide them into the structure and then put adobe on top to create the wall. So we went to Chakra Andina and we actually saw an example of it, where they put the straw in the walls and then in the adobe outside of it, and we thought this would work the best for Lennon's cabin. For the modulars, we wanted them all to be the same size, so we created a structural grid for the plan that Lennon chose, which is on the left, and we were just trying to alter the measurements so that each modular would be the same size. It ended up being very chaotic, and we did a few iterations of it. So in the end, we created a 2 meter by 2 meter grid, where the modulars would be 1 meter by 1 meter, and they can be stacked on top to create 2 meters tall, and then there would be 2 next to each other to be 2 wide in between each column. We also met with a structural engineer that helped us think about all the joints of the beams on the top and how they connected, and he helped us a lot by saying we actually didn't need as many columns as we thought we did for the building to stand up. So in the end, this was the structural grid that we ended up with, and it ends up so that in between each red column on the top, there's 2 modules, and then for going down, it'll always be a full module. And then in the middle, the structural engineer just said that the beam had to be a little bit bigger to support it, but we didn't need a column in the middle of the space for it.
Okay, so looking at the modules, it obviously influenced our final design. So a lot of the dimensions of the rooms and the bathroom had to change, which you can see the single bed bunk bedroom is smaller than the toilet bathroom, but it worked out best to work with the modules and conform with the dimensions we had to work with and the columns. So what changed here is we still do have a very narrow corridor. So we've moved the climatized space into the porch where the coat hanger and the table, but it's quite intimate and it nicely opens into the big open plan. And I quite like that it doesn't actually enter into the kitchen anymore. Also, this has created quite nice circulation around the house. Yeah, so that was the final design that we came up with, and a rendered final design model on Rhino. We couldn't get adobe, but we found a brown wood which would resemble it, as best as possible.
For building the structure, for the actual building, it would have to go into steps, again, for the modular building. So to start, it would be the foundations and the floor, and then the columns would be put in. And then the supporting bottom beams that go under the modulars would go in. And then the top beams, including the one that needs to be bigger to go across, would go on top to create the form of the building. And the roof structure would go on, as well as the pine wood, plastic, metal, and straw, just so that it's covered and so that the modulars would not be open to all the weathering. Then the interior and exterior modules would go in with the straw. They would be, yeah. And the door frames, just to make the doors a little smaller, would be added. And finally, the trombe wall and its glass would be added to have this final structural model. For the roof, it is the eucalyptus structure that would be put on, and then we'll have a layer of pine wood to cover from the weathering, and plastic to stop the excess water that might leak in. And then corrugated metal sheets would go on top and straw on the very top. But the straw is mainly for aesthetics.
Okay, so one of the bigger challenges after working with the modules and adjusting the dimensions of the building was seeing how much of the wood of Lenin's we could utilize to, bring the cost down and make Lenin not have to buy as much wood as possible. So from the Excel spreadsheet, I managed to obtain 300 of the pieces of wood, mainly for the exterior modules, the interior modules, the roof structure, and the top beams. But it was quite hard finding, a lot of it was gluing two pieces together or nailing them together and then adding joints to make pieces longer. But for the top beams and the bottom beams and some of the columns, it wasn't smart to try and glue 6 pieces of wood together, scrap pieces. So we just thought it'd be better to have structural strong pieces cut. But that was only 55 pieces in the end. And of the additional materials, obviously soil, metal sheets, and stone foundations he had on site. He would have to buy some clay and lime, I imagine. He had a very, very limited amount of pine wood, so he'd have to buy pine wood, glass, and some plastic sheathing, obviously, to prevent the water. This is very hard to read, but it's the breakdown of where the wood is coming for the builders. So yeah, it was quite hard to find out where the wood is actually being derived from.
In our final meeting with Lenin, we showed him all the designs, all the wood he needs to buy. He approved it. He liked it. His only suggestion was to put some more bamboo structural pieces around the 4 corners to block from the excess wind, because it is really windy in Salinas. And so at this point, this project is done and it will be handed off to Lenin so that he can actually build it. But there are more design projects here at El Terreno, and lots of hands-on experience for anyone else who wants to experience something like this.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Should probably just go back here.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, guys. This is great. So we still have about 10 minutes or so. So a great opportunity if anybody wants to ask some questions. I will start with one that I have. Can you guys just remove the share screen if possible? Let you guys work through that. So my first question would be, what was the biggest challenge? Because there was obviously lots of different challenges in a very different environment from what you're used to working on. What was the biggest challenge you faced and how did you overcome that?
There's no internet. Can you?
Oh, there you go. You're back now.
Okay.
Okay.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Oh
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, okay. I was asking, what was your the biggest challenge each of you faced while doing this project, and how did you overcome it?
Should you go first?
You can go first.
Oh, okay. Well, Mei Ling did a lot of the online 3D modeling because she's more experienced with it. So I'd say the biggest challenge was, so I'd say she faced more of the issues with the structural when it came to working with the modules. But I'd say the last week trying to utilize as much of the wood so we can keep the cost down. And figure out how different pieces can be cut and how it can all be assembled to use as much as possible. That was probably the biggest challenge, and I'm quite happy with how much we've done and how much we've used. But there is quite a lot of scraps, but the scraps are going to be used for the crossword on the modules, so even more will be used. But I'm pretty happy with how much we managed to utilize.
I actually do think like one of the biggest struggles was the structure. In a lot of my projects, I don't put that much detail. Like I do think about the structure, but the level of detail that needed to be put into it because it's actually being built, it was new to like have to be like, I can't be like, oh, like I'll come back to it because no, like it's actually being built. I need to think it out through. But the meeting with the structural engineer was really helpful, and I think he helped a lot.
Nice. Yeah, good example of how you need to work in a team when it comes to building projects, for sure. For sure. Does anybody else have a question for these guys?
I'm worried.
I'd love to hear one from Regis if he's got one as our new architecture intern.
I guess it's just too good.
Covered all the bases.
Okay. Well, if not, one more question then from me before we finish. What do you think? How do you think this experience is going to influence your work when you go back to the United States and to England? How is it going to inform your future practice becoming architects?
Big question. Well, I think less about the Adobe, because obviously Adobe isn't as practical in the climate especially in Cardiff. It rains a lot and it's not as useful. But I think just the whole experience in understanding how buildings are broken down, and like Mei Ling was saying, seeing how like we were faced with the structure and having to work out fully from start to finish instead of just the design element. I feel like that was quite helpful to inform the whole process from start to finish, and also the just everything I've learned in sustainability, more with the site visits and going to Salinas. We've tried to incorporate it here, but Chakrandina was the only site visit where we properly incorporated things. But even on the architecture trip and in different site visits throughout the 9 weeks, there's lots of different sustainable strategies and passive heating methods which could be used in the UK. Oh my god.
Oh.
Thank you, Mei Ling.
I think this experience has taught me a lot about like practicality, because having a set amount of wood that we can use for the project, really, I don't think we thought about that aspect early enough in the design process. And when we did finally think about it, we were like, oh, like we need to change everything.
Yeah.
But I think like in design, it's in my future designs, I'll think a lot more about like what materials are being used, how much of it, like the cost, everything like that.
Yeah, like the budgeting and like the restrictions of design, which you're not really given with in uni because you have a lot more freedom. like these kinds of restrictions were quite helpful to have to actually work around. That was a good experience.
Nice, great. Well, on behalf of Lenin, I want to thank you very much for making this contribution, because yeah, he really needed this help on the design aspect. He worked with lots of local builders who know how to recycle wood and stuff like that. But from the design aspect, you've really helped him out. So I want to thank you again for the hard work that you've put in over the last few weeks. And as I said, I really hope that it serves you guys going forwards in what you're doing next. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
yeah. So if anyone's listening and they're interested in joining El Terreno in our internship projects, there's more design projects. People are asking us for more people to come in and do some creative ideas like what Mei Ling and Richard have done. So please visit our website for more information. Until next time, Mei Ling and Richard, thank you so much. Safe onward journey, and on to the next projects, onwards and upwards. Okay.
Thank
Thanks
you so
everybody
Thank you.
for joining us. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Hasta luego.
Bye.